There is a story about American wine that most people have never heard. Not the California story, not the Napa story, not the story of European grapes coached into behaving like something they're not. The real story is older, stranger, more interesting. It starts in the American South. Virginia, 1609. Settlers planted vines within 2 years of landing at Jamestown. Georgia, 1733. James Oglethorpe arrives with a colonial charter and a genuine curiosity about what this soil can grow. The South was wine country before it was anything else, before cotton, before tobacco, before anyone decided what it was supposed to be. Then comes Thomas Jefferson. 50 years, 7 vineyard experiments. Not one bottle was made from his own grapes. He failed, repeatedly, expensively, and without ever losing faith in the idea. Then comes Prohibition. It doesn't just close wineries, it serves 300 years of knowledge. In the South, it arrives early, stays long, and when it finally lifts, most of what was known about growing wine in this region has to be rebuilt from scratch. What you're listening to right now is part of that rebuilding. My name is Sam Zamarripa. I farm wine grapes in the North Georgia mountains at a place called Doghobble Wine Farm. We grow American varietals, Norton, Chamberson, Catawba, Lamanto, Muscadine, Scuppernong, and others. Grapes with American roots, American character, and a story worth telling. I am a farmer. Mother Nature is my partner. We are not marketers, distributors, or corporations. We are artisans, accountable to the land, committed to the vine, and completely uninterested in making a wine that belongs somewhere else. We want to make something genuinely, stubbornly, beautifully ours. This podcast, Uncorked, is a series of conversations about the American wine story. We'll talk to historians, farmers, scientists, and the occasional visionary who got there before the rest of us caught up. James Oglethorpe, for the record, is already on my list. We are starting because there is only one place to start, with Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson is the patron saint of American wine. He deserves the title. But here is what most people miss. Wine was not a hobby for him. It was not a rich man's indulgence. It was part of something much larger. Jefferson lived at the frontier of the defining technology of his era, and that technology was botany. Plant science was to 1800 what artificial intelligence is to 2026, the force at the center of everything. Medicine, manufacturing, food, fiber, fuel, geopolitics. Every major question about the future ran through the plant kingdom. Jefferson understood this completely. He smuggled rice out of Italy at the risk of death. He cataloged hundreds of plant varieties. He corresponded with botanists across 2 continents. He believed, correctly, that the right plant in the right soil could change the trajectory of a nation. Wine grapes were part of that vision. Not just something to drink, something to prove. He didn't get there in his lifetime, but the question he asked is still being answered. We're some of the people answering it. This is Uncorked. Let's begin. One note before we begin. The voice of Thomas Jefferson you'll hear in this series is AI generated, but his words are not invented. Every answer, every opinion, every argument Jefferson makes in these conversations is drawn from the historical record. His letters, his farm books, his published writings, contemporary accounts, and the work of the scholars who have spent careers inside his archives. We organized his words around questions we thought were worth asking. We took a little literary license for form. We did not put ideas in his mouth that were not already there. This is historical fiction. It just happens to be true. I'm standing in a vineyard in the North Georgia mountains. About 40 yards from where I'm standing, there's a vine, thick trunk, dark berries, built as it belongs here, because it does. It's called Norton. Some people call it Cynthiana. By most accounts, the greatest red wine grape native to North America. Fully, stubbornly, completely American. This vine is why I'm here. This vine and the 200-year argument about what American wine can be, and one particular Virginian who spent 50 years asking the right question and never quite got to taste the answer. I grow wine grapes because I believe in something. I believe the Southern Appalachians, this specific soil, this specific altitude, this specific conversation between mountain and vine and weather can produce wines that belong nowhere else on earth. Not better than France, not worse, just ours. Completely, unapologetically ours. Thomas Jefferson believed something very similar. He just never got the vines to cooperate. Today, across what I will describe as a creative but sincere time zone difference, I am sitting down with Mr. Jefferson to talk about wine, botany, failure, persistence, and what it means to believe in a piece of ground before the ground has given you any reason to. Mr. Jefferson, welcome to Doghobble Wine Farm. Welcome to North Georgia. And before we go any further, how would you like to be addressed?
I left the presidency in 1809 with considerable relief, Mr. Zamarripa. I have not missed the title for a single day ever since. I am a farmer, a reader, a man who has spent the better part of his retirement arguing about grapes with people who grow them. Mr. Jefferson will do perfectly, and in a vineyard I think we can agree, titles feel somewhat beside the point. Now, tell me about this Norton vine, because I believe a box of cuttings addressed to my grandson arrived at my agent's office in Richmond in 1824, and I have always suspected they were never planted. Am I correct?
You are correct. They weren't planted. You died 2 years later without ever tasting it, but I have a glass of it right here. It's extraordinary, Mr. Jefferson. Dark, structured, completely itself. I think you're going to like it. Before France, before Monticello's vineyards, before the legendary cellar, what were you actually drinking?
What every American was drinking. Madeira, Port. The heavy fortified wines of Portugal and Spain. We had drunk them so long under British rule that we mistook habit for taste. It never occurred to most of my countrymen to ask whether there was something better. I was no different. Until France.
Tell me about France, because what you did there was not what most diplomats do. You went into the vineyards.
I hired a small horse. The French call it a bidet, which I always found an unfortunate name for a perfectly agreeable animal, put a local peasant on another, and rode through the vineyards of Burgundy for days, into the cellars, into the homes of the farmers. I wanted to understand what I was tasting, not simply taste it. That is the only honest way to learn anything.
That image, the American minister to France, riding through Burgundy mud, talking to farmers, that is not the Jefferson most people know, but it is completely the Jefferson I recognize. You want to understand wine? You start with the dirt.
The dirt is the whole story, Mr. Zamarripa. Everything else is commentary. I observed in Burgundy that the best wines came from the extremities of the slope, not the top, not the bottom. The place where drainage meets exposure, where the vine has to work. A comfortable vine makes an ordinary wine.
We say the same thing in North Georgia. The vine has to earn it. You also did something in Bordeaux that still astonishes people. You walked those estates in 1787 and essentially predicted the 1855 classification, the official ranking of Bordeaux's greatest chateaux, 68 years before it was written. Margaux, Latour, Haut-Brion, Lafite. First quality. You got it right before the world agreed on the ranking. Was that instinct or science?
Observation applied with patience. The soil speaks if you are quiet enough to hear it. Gravel drains well. Slope creates exposure. Proximity to water moderates temperature. These are not mysteries, they are patterns, and patterns yield to anyone willing to look carefully enough. I had the advantage of having no preconceptions about what I was supposed to find. I simply looked. Though I will confess, Chateau d'Yquem required no great powers of observation. That wine announces itself.
Some things don't need analysis. Now, here is something I want our listeners to understand about you, because I think it reframes everything. You were not a wealthy man with an expensive hobby. You were living at the absolute frontier of the most important science of your era. Botany was to 1800 what artificial intelligence is to 2026. The force driving everything, medicine, manufacturing, food, fiber, fuel, geopolitics. Every major question about civilization's future ran through the plant kingdom, and you understood that completely. The rice story alone tells us everything. You smuggled a specific strain of rice out of Italy in your coat pocket. The Italians punished that with death. Most people hear that and think, bold move for a diplomat. But there's more to it than boldness, isn't there?
Considerably more. The rice cultivated in the American South at that time required flooded, stagnant swamps. And those swamps were killing people, generating disease, creating conditions of suffering I could not accept as permanent. I had learned that this particular Italian variety could be grown on dry land, no swamps required. So yes, I was stealing a grain. But the grain was also a public health argument, a labor argument, an argument about what American agriculture could be if we planted the right thing in the right place, rather than forcing the wrong thing onto land that would rather grow something else. Which, when I say it aloud, sounds remarkably similar to 50 years of grape growing.
It is exactly the same argument. Plant what belongs. Stop fighting the land and start listening to it. That is the entire philosophy of what we do at Doghobble, applied to rice 2 centuries before we applied it to Norton. And that's the thing about you that most people miss. Wine grapes were part of a much larger vision. Not just something to drink, something to prove. That this continent, this new republic, could grow something great, something worthy.
A republic that grows its own wine has made a certain kind of peace with its own land. It has stopped asking Europe for permission to be civilized. That was the argument. Every vine I planted was a sentence in that argument, even the ones that died.
Especially the ones that died. Now, you did all of this research in France, walked the greatest vineyards in the world, and developed one of the most educated palates of your era. And then you took all of that knowledge back to Virginia and planted it in the ground. And the vines kept dying.
With impressive consistency, yes.
Before we get into the failure, the scuppernong, because you had it in your cellar. And I want our listeners to understand exactly what that means, because scuppernong and muscadine get used interchangeably, and they shouldn't. Muscadine is the species, Vitis rotundifolia, native to the American Southeast, built for our heat, our humidity, our soil. Scuppernong is one variety of muscadine, the original, the bronze beauty that grows wild along the Georgia and Carolina coast. What you had in your cellar, Mr. Jefferson, that was scuppernong. What we grow at Doghobble is the broader muscadine family, scuppernong among them. Scuppernong is the grandmother. Muscadine is the whole family reunion.
A family reunion I would have been glad to attend more often than I did. The scuppernong required nothing extraordinary of our soil or our climate. No coaxing, no imported expertise, no desperate intervention against rot and frost and the 1,000 indignities my European varieties suffered without relief. It simply grew, with a confidence, a rootedness that my Nebbiolo and Sangiovese never managed in 50 years of trying. There is a lesson in that which I confess I learned too late.
That lesson is the foundation of everything we do at Doghobble. When a vine simply grows, when it asks only for what this place already provides, that is Mother Nature telling you something. She has already run the experiment. Thousands of years of southern heat, cold, humidity, disease pressure, and red clay soil. She selected the survivors. Muscadine, Scuppernong, Norton, Catawba, Lomanto, Concord. These vines are not Plan B. They are the answer the land already gave us. Our job, as farmers, as artisans, is to be humble enough to listen. Sustainability for us is not a marketing word. It is the decision to plant what belongs here, tend what thrives here, and make wine that could only come from here. When the vine is at home, the farmer's work changes entirely. You stop fighting nature and start working with her.
Conviction, Mr. Zamarripa, is the only fertilizer that never fails.
I'm putting that on the wall of the tasting room. Mr. Jefferson, I have to go somewhere uncomfortable with you. You are celebrated as the patron saint of American wine. Your name is on a winery. Historians call you the country's first distinguished viticulturist. And yet, 7 experiments, 50 years, not one bottle of wine was made from Monticello-grown grapes. I grow wine in the mountains. I know what it costs, financially, physically, emotionally, to put vines in the ground and watch them fail. So I'm not asking this to embarrass you. How do you sit with that failure?
The way any honest farmer sits with the weather. You did not cause it, you could not prevent it, but you were present for it, and presence carries its own kind of accountability. The European vine is magnificent in its homeland. In Virginia, it was fragile, susceptible, and, I say this with 50 years of evidence, profoundly disinclined to survive our winters. The black rot. The cold arrived without warning and killed everything overnight. I replanted. I imported new varieties. I brought Tuscan vignerons to Monticello at considerable expense. The vines kept dying.
7 experiments. Most people would have stopped at 2. And I want to make sure our listeners understand exactly why the European vine failed here. Because it isn't bad luck and it isn't bad farming. It's biology. You were essentially trying to install European software on American hardware over and over 7 times. The Virginia environment simply would not accept it.
That is an unusual way to describe it, but not inaccurate. The most insidious enemy was not the frost nor the rot, though both were formidable. It was something invisible, a tiny insect, phylloxera, that lives in the soil and feeds on the roots of grapevines. The Native American vines had coexisted with this creature for thousands of years. They developed a defense. When the insect bites into a native root, the root secretes a substance that seals the wound and repels the attacker. The vine and the pest had reached over millennia a kind of understanding. My European vines had no such understanding. Their roots were unprotected. The insect would feed, leave open wounds, the roots would rot underground, and the entire vine would starve, often before I could see any sign of what was happening above the soil. I was losing battles I could not even observe.
And that is precisely why Norton thrives where Nebbiolo failed. Norton's roots carry 2,000 years of American evolutionary memory. They know this soil. They know its diseases. They know its pests. They arrived at Doghobble already equipped for everything our climate could throw at them. That's not just sustainability. That's 2,000 years of Mother Nature doing the research so we don't have to.
Had I understood that fully, truly understood it, I might have turned toward the native vine 20 years sooner than I did, though I suspect the patriot in me would have insisted on one more attempt at Burgundy regardless.
I understand that impulse completely. You brought Philip Mazzi over from Italy, a professional viticulturist. You gave him nearly 200 acres. You co-founded the Virginia Wine Company with George Washington as a shareholder. And then the Revolutionary War came through, and a German general's horses trampled the vineyard. At some point, does the universe send you a message?
The universe sent me several messages. I chose to interpret them as temporary setbacks rather than permanent verdicts. This may say more about my stubbornness than my wisdom, but what is the alternative? To concede that America cannot grow wine? To accept that we are permanently dependent on Europe for everything refined, everything worth savoring? That was not an argument I was willing to make. Not as a farmer, not as a patriot. The dream was not wrong. The vine was wrong. There is an important difference.
The dream was not wrong, the vine was wrong. That is the story of every serious grower who ever lived. You plant what you believe in. The land tells you whether you're right. And if you're paying attention, really paying attention, you adjust. You don't abandon the dream, you find the right vine for the dream, which is exactly what happened, just not in your lifetime.
Tell me.
After all the failed vinifera, after Prohibition buried what little progress had been made, the Native American varietals came back. Norton, Muscadine, Catawba. And they didn't come back as consolation prizes. They came back as the answer. Virginia is now a legitimate wine region. North Georgia is emerging as one of the most promising wine-growing regions in North America. The grapes that survive here, that thrive here, that produce wines worth drinking, they are American grapes, the ones that simply grew. Your argument won, Mr. Jefferson. It just took a while.
How long?
About 250 years, give or take.
I would have preferred faster, but I will accept it. The Norton in your glass, is it truly good? Not merely American, not merely native, genuinely, objectively good.
It won a gold medal in Vienna in 1873, before Prohibition killed the industry. And the vines we grow today, same grape, same American roots, produce something dark, structured, complex, completely itself. It tastes like nowhere else on earth, which is exactly what you were trying to prove was possible.
Then it was worth it.
That's where we'll leave Mr. Jefferson for today, with a question about whether 50 years of failure was worth it, and with a glass of Norton in his hand. In our next conversation, Episode 1, Part B, we go deeper. The vine he almost had, the grandson who couldn't have known what was in the box, the argument wine made in American politics, and the most heartbreaking story in American wine history, arriving in a wooden box at a Richmond counting house in 1824. We are just getting started. I'm Sam Zamarripa. This is Uncorked.